friends. Welcome back to Talking Everything Bible. Today, we're going to start talking about the history and the authorship of the Pentateuch, also called the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. I will answer many questions people have about these books. If you have not watched my first 2 episodes, Bible Timeline and What's Faith Got to Do with It, I invite you to watch those first, as they are a good foundation of what I will be talking about over the next several episodes. So, if you got about 15 minutes and you want to learn more about the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, let's go. My name is Kurt, and I've been a student of the Bible for over 45 years, and an ordained minister for 20 years. Am I an expert in the Bible? That's for you to decide. Do I have an open mind about it? Yes, I think I do. I will be sharing insights into the structure, makeup, authors, and history of the Bible. Not so much about its content. I invite you to read the content for yourself. Now let's get into it. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy make up what in Hebrew is called the Torah, a word used in Hebrew both as law and as teaching. In Greek, these books are simply called the Pentateuch, which simply means 5 books. I'm going to answer the most common questions asked about these books and attempt to give you an answer to the best of my ability. All right, question 1. Who wrote the Torah? There's 2 answers. The simple answer is Moses. How do we know that? Well, the Torah says so, first of all. Exodus states Moses wrote all the words of the Lord. Deuteronomy states Moses finished writing the words of the law, or the Torah, until they were complete. Okay, that's the simple answer. Here's the more complicated answer. It makes sense that Moses wrote Exodus through Deuteronomy, those 4 books, because he was there. He was the leader of the Hebrews in the Exodus from Egypt. He received the law in person from God himself on Mount Sinai, which is Leviticus. He oversaw and traced the lineage of the Hebrews for Numbers. And Moses made the covenant that binds Yahweh, the Hebrew word for God, and Israel by oath of fidelity and obedience, which is Deuteronomy. So that leaves us with Genesis. The big question is, how did Moses know the details about the creation of the world by God? After all, they weren't written down anywhere, or were they? We'll get into that in a little bit. What about the details about Adam and Eve, Noah, the flood? How did Moses know so much detail about that? After all, he wasn't around for any of that. Okay. To answer that, we need to go back in time and start with Noah. Now wait a minute. Why Noah? Well, Noah and his family are the real start of the human population. Hold on. I know what you're going to say. That was Adam and Eve. Well, Adam and Eve represent the creation of the human race. But it is accepted in both Christianity and many other religious traditions that humanity's lineage starts with Noah's family. The Bible describes Noah as a man who had a special and personal relationship with God and would have learned directly from God and passed down to many generations all the accounts of Genesis. Now, it is true that this would have been from generation to generation orally. In other words, parents told their children the details. They told their children. Which kind of begs the question, how do we know it didn't get corrupted? Well, starting with Abraham, we have indications that the Hebrew accounts began to be recorded in written form, so that by the time we get back to Moses, The accounts of Genesis were ingrained into Hebrew society, and that combined with the fact that Moses was in direct contact with God, being taught by God for 40 days straight, we can come to the confident conclusion that Moses was able to write Genesis with full knowledge of the details described therein. He had direct teaching from God. He had the oral traditions passed down still to that date. And also, he had certain written accounts. And these are interesting because these were actually accounts written by the Egyptians, and the Egyptians kept records and actually wrote many of the Genesis stories. So with all those things combined, we can be confident that Moses wrote Genesis in detail without corruption. Remember that Exodus states that Moses wrote the words of the Lord, not just his own words. So we can be confident that they were accurate. This brings us now to the second question. If that's the case, why would Moses have written about himself in the third person? You see, many scholars actually use this to dispute the authorship of the Torah by Moses. And they point out that the Torah describes Moses and talks about him in the third person, which indicates Moses did not write the Torah, and that it was written many hundreds of years later. Okay, again, there's a simple answer and a more complicated one to this. The simple answer is that it was the writing style of the time. Both the Egyptian and the Hebrews never wrote in the first person. They always wrote in the third person. The Hebrews picked up many of their writing skills from the Egyptian, and Egyptian writing, again, was always in the third person. However, the more complicated answer is that Moses most likely did not physically sit down and write every word of the Torah. What the Bible clearly says is that Moses wrote every word the Lord gave him. With that, however, we also know that the recordings of the event by the Hebrew nation goes all the way back to Egypt. Early scribes would have worked under the direction of Moses and recorded what they were directed to record. Later, when the Levite tribe was established, one of their duties was to keep the Hebrew record. It was during Moses' time that the Hebrew scribes began. These were the priests who dedicated their lives simply to the Torah and nothing else, making sure that the Torah was copied, making sure that it was accurate, and making sure that it got passed on again from generation to generation. All these things combined would explain the use of the third person concerning Moses in the Torah. Now we also know that Joshua, who led the Hebrew nation directly after Moses, had the complete words of the law. In other words, the Torah was completed. That's stated in Joshua. So there's no reason to think that the Torah was recorded by anyone other than Moses, and that it was completed by the time we get to Joshua. Okay, the third most common question about the Torah is, since we don't have any of the original writings, how do we know that the Torah is accurate today? Okay, it is true that the earliest records of the Torah only date back to around 1,000 years after Christ. This question leads us into a very technical and complicated talk of the dating and accuracy of ancient manuscripts, which I will leave for my next talk. It is written, so it shall be. Until then, have a very blessed rest of your day.